Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. He knocked and smiled. I should have known better. But maybe that's the thing about life, we don't always know when a single moment is about to change everything. It was late afternoon, one of those long days when the sky hangs low with grey clouds and the air smells faintly of rain. I had been in the kitchen, trying to distract myself by making tea, when the knock came. I wasn't expecting anyone, not really. My world had been quiet for a while, my children grown, my house a little too still, my evenings often filled with books and the hum of the television in the background. When I opened the door, there he was. James. My neighbor, 2 houses down. We'd exchanged polite hellos in the past, shared small talk about the weather or the state of the front yards, but never much more. Yet that day, he stood there with a smile that carried something more than casual politeness. It was a smile that seemed to hold a secret, though I couldn't yet tell if it was mine to know. Afternoon, he said, his voice warm, carrying a calmness that immediately softened the tension I hadn't realized was sitting in my chest. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I laughed softly, brushing my hair back with a self-conscious motion. Not at all. I was just making tea. His eyes lit up as if I had offered him something precious. Tea sounds wonderful, he said. There was no push in his tone, no demand, just a gentle suggestion hanging in the space between us. And before I fully understood why, I found myself stepping back, holding the door open, letting him into my home. Inside, the house felt different with him there. I had grown used to its silence, its familiar corners, but now the walls seemed to breathe a little, as if grateful for another presence. James moved with an ease that surprised me, looking around not with judgment but with appreciation. You've made it cozy, he said, his hand brushing over the back of the chair before he sat down. It feels lived in, warm. That comment stayed with me as I poured the tea. It wasn't often someone noticed the small touches I had kept around, the quilt draped over the armchair, the framed photographs that lined the shelves, the little stack of books on the coffee table. These details were part of me, reminders of years gone by, yet they often went unseen. We sat across from one another, steam curling from our cups, the rain starting to patter softly against the windows. The sound wrapped around us, making the world feel smaller, more intimate. He asked about my garden, and I found myself telling him stories of how I'd planted the roses when my daughter was still little, how each spring I waited for the first blooms. He listened, not just politely, but truly listened. His eyes stayed with mine, attentive, unhurried, and then, almost without meaning to, I asked him about his life. That's when the room shifted again. His words carried weight, stories of years gone by, of change, of the quiet ache that comes from time and loss. We were not so different, I realized. 2 people, both with histories that had shaped us, both learning how to live in the space that comes after. There was a moment when the silence between us grew long. Not uncomfortable, not strained, just full. He looked at me, his expression soft, almost searching. I felt the warmth rise in my chest, the kind that comes when you realize someone truly sees you. Not just the surface, not just the polite smile you put on for the world, but the deeper layers you keep tucked away. That was when he smiled again. That smile. The same one he'd given me at the door, but now it felt heavier, more meaningful. My instinct told me there was something in it I should have questioned, should have guarded against. But instead, I let it in. I'm glad I stopped by, he said quietly. His words were simple, yet they carried something that brushed against my heart like a whisper. The rain outside grew stronger, tapping against the glass in a steady rhythm. Time seemed to slow, and I found myself caught between the safety of my quiet routines and the pull of something new, something uncertain. My mind raced with questions I couldn't ask, fears I couldn't name, but my heart was strangely calmed. We sat there until the tea cooled, until the rain softened again, until the light outside dimmed into that soft blue haze of early evening. When he finally stood to leave, there was no rush in his movements. He lingered by the door, his hand resting lightly on the frame as if he wasn't ready to step back out into the world. Thank you, he said, and I noticed the way his voice carried something more than gratitude. For the tea, and the company. I nodded, my throat tighter than I wanted to admit. Anytime, I whispered. He gave me one last smile, the kind that seemed to promise something I couldn't quite name, and then he was gone, walking down the path, disappearing into the evening shadows. I stood there long after the door closed, listening to the quiet of my home, but it didn't feel the same anymore. The silence was different now, fuller, heavier. Something had shifted, though I didn't yet know what it would mean. All I knew was that he had knocked, he had smiled, and against my better judgment, I had let him in, and in that small, ordinary moment, I should have known better. The next morning, I woke to the soft light of dawn spilling across the kitchen floor. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. James' visit lingered in my mind like a melody I couldn't forget, a tune both familiar and strange. I found myself replaying the conversation, the gentle cadence of his voice, the way he looked at me not just as a neighbor, not just as someone polite, but as though he were seeing me for the first time, fully. I tried to tell myself it was just a moment, fleeting, nothing to read too deeply into. After all, we had only met that once, in the safe, controlled space of my home, sharing tea and stories. But there was a pull I couldn't deny, a curiosity that tugged at me all morning as I went about the routine of dishes, emails, and the gentle hum of the radio. By mid-afternoon, I found myself at the window, watching the neighborhood with an absent-minded attention. That's when I saw him, James, across the street, tending to the small flower bed in front of his house. He was humming softly, a sound carried by the wind, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. His presence, even from a distance, brought warmth to a morning that had started ordinary. I knew it was unusual, feeling so drawn to someone I barely knew. I chastised myself lightly, reminding myself of the wisdom of age, of the lessons learned from years of careful living. And yet, the pull remained. There was something in the way he carried himself, something gentle but unshakably confident, that made me want to step outside, to walk across the street and say hello. By late afternoon, I had convinced myself to do just that. I slipped on a sweater, brushed my hair quickly, and opened the door to the crisp air of early fall. The street was quiet, the sun low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. James was kneeling by the flowers, hands dirty from the soil, but he looked up at me with that same smile, warm and unguarded. "Good afternoon," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I didn't expect to see you." "I thought I'd come say hello," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I realized I didn't properly thank you for yesterday." He straightened, the sun catching in his eyes, making them gleam with a quiet intensity. "You don't need to thank me," he said softly. "I enjoyed it. More than I expected, actually." There was a subtle tension in the air, one that wasn't uncomfortable but palpable, like a thread stretched just enough that you can feel it, waiting to be tugged. I realized then that this was not about obligation or routine. This was about connection. Something neither of us had anticipated, and yet it was undeniably there. We talked as I helped him adjust the small flowers, our conversation meandering from light-hearted observations about the weather to reflections on life, on choices, on the little moments that define a person's days. I shared stories I hadn't told in years, tales of travel, of quiet evenings alone, of the small triumphs and disappointments that had quietly shaped me. He listened, truly listened, his gaze never wavering, his questions thoughtful, respectful. I noticed the way he paused, the way he considered each word before speaking. There was no rush, no need to fill silences with idle chatter. Just presence. Just an honesty that felt rare in the world I had grown accustomed to. As the sun dipped lower, painting the street in golden light, I felt something shift again, a gentle stirring in my chest. I realized I was opening myself to trust, to vulnerability, and though a part of me cautioned restraint, another part, an honest, sincere part, welcomed it. I wanted to know him, to understand the layers behind the smile, the calm confidence, the stories he carried quietly in his eyes. When it was finally time to step back, to return to the quiet of my house, we lingered in the doorway of his yard, reluctant to let the moment end. "I should probably go in," I said softly, though neither of us made a move to break the lingering connection. "Of course," he replied, his voice calm but edged with a warmth that stayed with me as I walked back to my own door. "But I hope this isn't the last time we talk." I nodded, smiling, though my thoughts were a mixture of caution and anticipation. "Neither do I." Once inside, I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply. The house felt the same in its physical shape, yet entirely different in essence. The presence of connection, of genuine interaction, had shifted the air. I found myself reflecting not just on James, but on the quiet longing that had lived in me for years, the desire for understanding, for companionship, for someone who sees you without pretense. And though the afternoon had ended without dramatic gestures or sweeping declarations, the seed had been planted. A small, fragile hope that perhaps life could still surprise me, still offer moments of quiet discovery, of trust earned and given. That evening, I found myself sitting by the window, the sky deepening into twilight, wondering what tomorrow might bring. The thought of James, of his smile, of the calm certainty he carried, made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. It was a gentle awakening, a reminder that life could still surprise, that the unexpected could still be beautiful, even when caution whispered otherwise. I drifted to sleep with that warmth lingering, knowing that the story was just beginning, that this new chapter of connection was unfolding, one quiet, profound moment at a time. The following week, I noticed myself anticipating the small moments more than I cared to admit. A rustle of leaves outside my window, a neighbor walking by, the sound of footsteps on the pavement, it all felt charged with the possibility of seeing James again. Part of me laughed at myself, scolding my own imagination, but another part quietly relished the anticipation. Life had been quiet for so long, and suddenly, there was this subtle tension, a small thrill in the air I hadn't experienced in years. It was a Friday afternoon when he appeared at my door again, this time without warning. I had been tidying up the living room, half listening to an old record I hadn't played in months, when the knock came. My heart jumped unexpectedly, not out of fear, but in a way that reminded me I was still capable of feeling surprise, of feeling alive. "Hello," he said, leaning slightly against the frame, casual yet somehow deliberate in the timing of his arrival. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." I smiled, stepping aside to let him in. "Not at all," I said, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "I was just enjoying some quiet." We settled into the living room, the soft hum of the record filling the space. There was a comfortable rhythm in the way we spoke, a back and forth that didn't feel forced. I found myself sharing memories I hadn't spoken aloud in years, the subtle details of my past, the choices I had made, the regrets and small victories. And he listened, not just with polite interest, but with a depth that surprised me. At some point, the conversation turned to more personal reflections. We spoke of dreams deferred, of moments that defined us, of the ways in which time had taught us patience and resilience. There was a pause then, a silence that was almost electric. It wasn't heavy or uncomfortable, but it was undeniably there, a shared acknowledgement that what we were exploring was rare and fragile. James looked at me then, not with curiosity, not with judgment, but with a kind of understanding that felt both startling and comforting. "I feel like we're discovering something here," he said quietly. His voice wasn't probing, it was an observation, tentative but sincere. "Yes," I whispered, feeling the weight of the truth in that single word. "I think we are." The afternoon light softened through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. It was the kind of light that made everything feel suspended in a moment out of time, a pause where the world outside didn't matter, where the only thing that existed was the gentle interplay between two people sharing a rare connection. We laughed at shared stories, the kind of laughter that is unhurried and deep, spilling from a place of comfort and trust. And yet, beneath it all, there was an undercurrent, a quiet recognition that this moment was meaningful, that it mattered. I realized then that my initial reservations, the instincts that whispered caution, were giving way to something different, a deliberate choice to allow myself to experience connection without fear. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the floor, James stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street bathed in the soft glow of evening. He didn't speak at first, but the look in his eyes suggested he was reflecting, absorbing the quiet intimacy of the room, of the moment we had built together. "I'm glad I came by," he said finally, turning back to me. "These moments, they're rare, you know?" I nodded, a warmth spreading through my chest. "I know," I replied softly. "And I'm grateful for them." When he finally left that evening, the parting was gentle, unhurried, filled with mutual respect and an unspoken understanding that what we had shared was significant. I closed the door behind him, feeling a strange mixture of contentment and anticipation. The house, once quiet and still, now seemed alive with possibility, charged with the potential of future encounters, of conversations yet to unfold. That night, as I sat by the window watching the stars emerge one by one, I realized how profoundly small gestures could transform a life. A knock at the door, a smile, a willingness to share stories and listen with care, these were the things that reminded me that connection is precious, that trust and understanding can emerge in unexpected ways, and that allowing oneself to embrace those moments could lead to growth, reflection, and, perhaps, something lasting. I drifted to sleep thinking of him, not in longing or desire, but with a sense of calm anticipation. The world felt wider, fuller, richer. And I knew, deep down, that whatever happened next, I had begun a journey not just with James, but with myself, rediscovering the quiet strength and openness I hadn't realized I still carried. The days that followed unfolded in a way that felt both natural and extraordinary. There was no grand announcement, no sudden turning point, just a series of small, meaningful moments that seemed to thread together, weaving a tapestry I hadn't expected. Each time James came by, or I found myself crossing paths with him, there was a quiet recognition in our interactions, a growing understanding that went beyond mere words. One afternoon, I invited him to see the garden in full bloom. The roses, carefully nurtured over the years, were finally in their peak, their colors vibrant against the fading greens of early autumn. He walked slowly among the beds, his hands brushing lightly over the petals, his eyes taking in the details with the kind of attention I had seldom encountered. "They're beautiful," he said softly, voice almost reverent. "You've cared for them well." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "They've been my companions for a long time," I said. "And it feels nice to share them with someone who notices." We spent the afternoon tending the garden together in companionable silence, exchanging small stories, laughing at minor mishaps, and marveling at the little surprises nature offered. A bee resting on a lavender stem, the unexpected bloom of a late-season daisy. There was a rhythm to our shared activity, an ease that allowed us to be ourselves without pretense, without expectation. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a golden glow over the petals and leaves, I realized something profound. Trust had deepened between us. It wasn't rushed or forced, it had grown quietly, organically, built on attentiveness, respect, and a willingness to truly see one another. And in that moment, I understood that this connection, unexpected as it was, had opened a door not just to companionship, but to understanding, reflection, and perhaps even a renewed sense of purpose. Later that evening, we sat together on the porch, the garden fading into twilight behind us. The air was cool, filled with the scent of damp earth and fading blooms. We spoke of hopes and uncertainties, of what the coming months might hold, and I felt a calm clarity in the exchange. There was no need for dramatics, no pressure to define or label. The simplicity of shared presence was enough. "I'm grateful," he said quietly, looking at me with that steady, attentive gaze. "For this us, whatever it is." I reached out, lightly touching his hand, and felt the unspoken acknowledgement pass between us. "Me too," I said. "It feels right, doesn't it?" He nodded, and in that simple gesture, the weight of everything unspoken seemed to lift. It wasn't about what should happen next, or what anyone might expect. It was about this moment, about the trust and connection that had grown between us, delicate yet resilient. As the evening deepened, we remained there, side by side, watching the first stars emerge, sharing the quiet, reflective moments that often go unnoticed in the rush of life. There was a sense of completion, not in the form of an ending, but as a recognition that sometimes the most meaningful experiences are those that unfold gently, that grow through patience, attentiveness, and mutual respect. When he finally left, the goodbye was soft, warm, and full of understanding. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it for a moment, breathing deeply. My home, my life, had subtly shifted. I felt lighter, more connected, more open to the beauty of small, unexpected moments. That night, as I sat by the window, reflecting on the days we had shared, I realized how profoundly life can surprise us. A knock, a smile, a willingness to be present and attentive, it had opened a door I didn't even know existed. And I knew that while the future was uncertain, the trust and connection we had nurtured would remain, quietly shaping the days to come. I went to sleep with a sense of calm and gratitude, understanding that life's most meaningful encounters often arrive without warning. And in allowing myself to be open, to see and be seen, I had discovered not just a connection with James, but a renewed connection with myself, one that would stay with me, gently guiding me, for years to come.